AITA for walking out after my wife mocked my company and her father tried to buy it? I used to think the worst thing Rachel could say about me was that I never finished college. I was wrong. I'm Dylan, 35, and Rachel and I had been married for 9 years by the time she turned her promotion dinner into an ambush. From the outside, we looked steady. We had matching coats hanging by the door, dinner reservations on birthdays, and the same stupid argument every week about whether bowls belonged on the top or bottom rack of the dishwasher. Underneath all that, something had been cracking for a long time. Rachel was 36, smart, driven, polished, and very good at making people feel like she already knew the answer before they finished asking the question. I used to love that about her. When we first met, she was still building her career, and I was trying to turn a few years of practical experience and a stubborn streak into a real company. I didn't resent her ambition. I bragged about it. When she earned another certification, I took her out to dinner. When she stayed up late preparing for a presentation, I brought her coffee and ran through her slides while she practiced. When she got passed over for a role she deserved, I listened to her vent until 2 in the morning and told her she would get the next one. For a long time, she did the same for me. I left college because I was broke, exhausted, and learning more from the work I was already doing than from classes I could barely afford. I never pretended it was part of some brilliant plan. It was a hard decision made under pressure. I worked, learned the industry from the ground up, made expensive mistakes, and eventually built a company that employed 12 people. Rachel used to call that impressive. Then she started calling it lucky. At first, the comments were small enough to brush off. A friend would ask me about a contract, and Rachel would interrupt to correct a word I used, even when I had used it correctly. At dinner with her parents, she would say things like, "Dylan understands the practical side. I handle the grown-up explanations." People would laugh because she smiled when she said it. One night, after a couple we knew left our house, I told her the joke bothered me. She was rinsing wine glasses at the sink. Which joke? The one where I'm too uneducated to understand my own business. She rolled her eyes. I did not say that. You implied it. Oh, come on. You know I'm joking. It stops being a joke when I'm always the punchline. Rachel set a glass down harder than necessary. This is what I mean. You get sensitive whenever education comes up. I get sensitive when my wife uses it to make me look stupid. She stared at me for a second, then turned back to the sink. You're proving my point, she said. That became her favorite move. If I objected to being insulted, the objection itself became proof that I was insecure. If I stayed quiet, she took the silence as permission. Her father, Victor, was worse, but at least he had never pretended to respect me. Victor was 62 and had spent most of his adult life treating money like a moral credential. He spoke in a calm, measured voice that made insults sound like a quarterly analysis. He rarely raised his voice. He didn't have to. At family dinners, he would ask whether I had ever thought about getting serious. The first time he said it, my company had been open for 3 years. I'm already serious, I told him. Victor cut his steak and nodded as though humoring a child. There's a difference between hustle and judgment. Rachel's mother, Elaine, looked down at her plate. Rachel gave a tight little laugh and changed the subject. That happened often. Victor would say something cutting, Elaine would go quiet, and Rachel would smooth it over without actually defending me. For years, I told myself it didn't matter because I wasn't married to Victor. What I failed to admit was that Rachel had started sounding more like him every year. The months before her promotion were stressful for both of us. She was competing for a senior role and working late. My company was going through a controlled restructuring after 2 major clients changed their schedules at nearly the same time. It was a difficult quarter, but not a collapse. We had delayed receivables, a couple of vendor contracts that needed to be renegotiated, and some painful decisions about expenses. I had also been negotiating a new agreement that would stabilize our workload for the next 2 years. The agreement was real, but until the final signatures were in place, I treated it like what it was, pending. Rachel knew I was under pressure. She saw me at the kitchen table with printed financial summaries. She heard me taking early calls in the spare room. She watched me cross dates off a calendar and rewrite cash flow projections while dinner went cold beside me. One night, she stood behind me and glanced at a page before I covered it with my hand. "Why are you hiding it?" she asked. "I'm not hiding anything. It's company information. I'm your wife. And some of this is confidential." Her mouth tightened. If things are that bad, maybe you should let someone objective look at it. They're not that bad. We're restructuring. You have past due invoices. We also have receivables coming in. You've been saying that for weeks. I pushed my chair back and looked at her. A hard quarter isn't a funeral. Rachel crossed her arms. You always get defensive when someone asks basic questions. You're not asking basic questions. You're asking for names, account details, and vendor terms. I'm trying to understand what kind of mess you're in. That word stayed with me. Mess. Not a challenge. Not a transition. Not a problem we would handle together. A mess. A few days later, she asked which vendor had been the hardest to renegotiate with. She said she was curious. Then she asked whether one of my former employees had left because of management problems. I answered vaguely and changed the subject. At the time, I thought she was anxious and nosy. I didn't think she was collecting pieces. My friend Cole noticed the pattern before I did. Cole was 37 and had known me long enough to tell when I was pretending not to be bothered. We met for breakfast one Saturday, and I told him about a strange call I had received from a vendor. The vendor had asked whether future invoices should be sent to new ownership. I thought I had misheard him. What new ownership? I asked. There was a pause. Your wife's family, he said. I was told they might be stepping in. Who told you that? Victor. I sat very still at my desk while the vendor explained that Victor had sounded confident. He had referred to Rachel as part of the transition and implied that I was under personal and financial pressure. I told the vendor there was no sale, no transition, and no authorized change of ownership. Then I asked him to forward me the email. At breakfast, Cole read the message twice. This is not a misunderstanding, he said. I know. Does Rachel know he contacted them? I don't know. Cole looked at me over his coffee. You do know? You just don't want to say it yet. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the printed email. Victor's language was careful. He didn't directly claim he owned the company. He said he was exploring continuity options and wanted to avoid disruption during a possible leadership transition. It was the kind of wording that could create panic while giving him room to deny everything later. Cole tapped the paper. Save the original. Save the headers. Write down the date and time of the call. I'm not building a legal case. No, you're protecting yourself from people who have already started building a story. I looked toward the window. Rachel wouldn't let him interfere with my company. Cole leaned back. Then document everything, and you'll have nothing to worry about. 2 days later, Owen emailed me. Owen had worked for me for almost 4 years before leaving for another opportunity. We had disagreed at times, but we had parted on decent terms. His email subject line was simply, "You should see this." Victor had contacted him through a professional networking site. The message asked whether Owen would be willing to speak confidentially about my pattern of mismanagement. Victor wrote that he was performing informal due diligence because a family-led acquisition might be necessary to protect employees and clients. Owen's reply was short. I left for my own reasons. I won't confirm something that isn't true. Then he forwarded the exchange to me with a note. I'm not getting involved in a hit job. Thought you should know. That was the moment my concern hardened into suspicion. I called Cole. You were right. I was hoping I wasn't. What do I do? Nothing emotional. I'm not emotional. You sound like you're holding a wrench hard enough to bend it. I looked down. He was not far off. Cole continued. Save everything. Don't confront Victor yet. Don't give Rachel a chance to erase anything or coordinate a cleaner explanation. She's my wife. I know. The way he said it hurt more than if he had said nothing. Rachel's promotion dinner was 3 nights later. She had spent months working toward the role, and despite everything, I wanted to be proud of her. I wore the suit she liked. I picked up the watch I had ordered for her and wrapped it myself after the store's gift wrap tore in the car. The banquet room had round tables covered in white cloths, folded napkins, water glasses, and printed place cards. Rachel's co-workers moved from table to table, congratulating her. She looked happy in a way I hadn't seen for months. For the first hour, I let myself believe the tension between us could wait. She introduced me to an executive I had met once before. This is Dylan, she said. He runs his own little operation. The executive smiled politely. I remember. How's business? Before I could answer, Rachel touched my arm. Complicated, she said. But he's learning. The executive's smile faded slightly. I looked at Rachel. She squeezed my arm as if I were the one making things awkward. Later, Victor arrived carrying a leather document folder. He shook my hand and held it for half a second too long. "Pride is expensive, Dylan," he said quietly. I pulled my hand back. "Good evening to you too." He smiled. That should have told me everything. After dinner, someone tapped a spoon against a glass, and Rachel stepped up to the microphone. She thanked her team, her mentors, her parents, and everyone who had supported her. People clapped. I clapped too. Then she looked at me. "And of course, my husband," she said. A few heads turned in my direction. Rachel smiled brightly. "Dylan has taught me that there are many paths to success. Some involve advanced degrees, professional discipline, and careful planning." A few people laughed. "And some involve dropping out of college, refusing advice, and hoping confidence counts as a business plan." The laughter this time was weaker. I felt heat move up my neck, but I kept my face still. Rachel continued. "He's been under a lot of pressure lately with his company, and I keep telling him there's no shame in admitting when something is beyond you." The room had gone quiet enough that I could hear silverware shifting on plates. Then she said it. "My dropout husband should sell me his sinking little company before he embarrasses us both." There were a few awkward half-laughs, the kind people make when they think a joke has gone wrong but don't know if they're allowed to stop smiling. Victor stood. He opened the leather folder, removed a printed contract, and walked it across the room to my table. "This is more generous than he deserves," he said. Nobody laughed. The contract had my company's legal name at the top. Beneath it was an offer amount that was less than the value of our existing equipment, receivables, and signed work combined. The transition language was vague. The control provisions were not. They had prepared it in advance. Rachel was still holding the microphone. She looked surprised by Victor's timing, but not by the contract. That distinction mattered. "Come on," she said softly, though the microphone picked it up. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked at her for several seconds. I was waiting for something. Regret. Fear. Any sign that she understood what she had just done. She lifted her eyebrows as if I were delaying a meeting. "Don't be dramatic," she said. "It's business." That was when I understood the dinner had never simply been about celebrating her promotion. The room was a stage. The speech was pressure. The contract was the final shove. If I objected, I would look emotional. If I signed, they would call it a rescue. If I argued about the price, they would treat that as proof I was desperate. I folded the first page back over the rest of the contract and slid it toward Victor. Then I placed my water glass on the table. "You just made this public," I told Rachel. "Remember that." I stood, took my coat, and walked out. She didn't follow me. By the time I reached my car, my phone was vibrating. Rachel called twice. Victor called once. Rachel called again. I let them ring. I sat behind the wheel and stared at the watch box on the passenger seat. Then I put it in the glove compartment and called Cole. He answered immediately. "Tell me you didn't hit anyone." "No." "Break anything?" "No." "Sign anything?" "No." "Good. What happened?" I told him. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't go home tonight if she's there." I'm not afraid of Rachel. This isn't about fear. It's about not giving them a scene they can describe however they want. I leaned my head back against the seat. "You don't have a marriage problem anymore," Cole said. "You have a paper trail." I booked a room, opened my laptop, and began writing down everything I could remember while it was fresh. Exact words. Approximate times. Who had been near the table? Who had heard Rachel through the microphone? At 11:14 p.m., Rachel left a voicemail. "You walked out of my promotion dinner like a child. Do you understand how humiliating that was? My coworkers saw everything. My family saw everything. Dad was trying to give you a way out, and you acted like we attacked you." A second voicemail arrived 10 minutes later. "You couldn't stand that the night was about me. That's what this is really about." Victor sent a text shortly after midnight. "Stop being emotional. Review the offer with a clear head. Pride does not pay employees." I took screenshots and forwarded everything to a personal email account Rachel couldn't access. Then I called Peter. Peter had handled my company's contracts for years. He was 45, dry, practical, and nearly impossible to provoke. When I finished explaining, he asked one question. "Did you sign anything?" No. Did Rachel ever receive legal authority to act for the company? No. Does Victor own any shares? No. Then they can dislike you. They cannot represent you. He told me to send every message, email, and document I had. He also told me to change passwords, review bank authorizations, and notify key employees that no ownership transition had been approved. Do not threaten them, he said. Let the language do its job. I spent most of the night securing access. Rachel had never been an owner or officer, but over the years I had shared more than I should have for convenience. She could see parts of my calendar. She knew where I kept paper copies of certain reports. She had once helped me set up a household printer that was also used for occasional company documents. I removed her calendar access, changed passwords, checked recovery emails, reviewed bank authorizations, and confirmed that no one outside the company had been added to any account. At 6 in the morning, I sent a written notice to my office manager and senior staff. No person other than me or the named managers had authority to give instructions, request records, contact vendors on behalf of the company, or discuss ownership changes. I also drafted a short clarification for key vendors and clients. There has been no sale, acquisition, or change in authority. Any statement suggesting otherwise is unauthorized. Please direct all questions to me. By 8, Peter had prepared formal letters to Rachel and Victor. The letters identified their contact with my vendor and Owen, demanded that they stop representing or implying that they represented the company, and warned that further interference with contracts or business relationships would be documented. At 8:37, my office manager called. Rachel and her father are here. I stood up from the hotel desk. Inside. No. I saw them pull in and lock the front door. They're in the parking lot. Good. Don't let them in. What do they want? Control. There was a pause. Do I call the police? Not unless they refuse to leave. Tell them they have no appointment and no authority. I'm on my way. When I arrived, Victor was standing near the entrance with the same leather folder under his arm. Rachel was beside him, still wearing the coat from the night before. Her hair was pulled back, and she looked furious rather than tired. My office manager stood behind the locked glass door. Victor walked toward me. We're here to start the transition, he said. There is no transition. Your refusal last night was emotional. We assumed you would be more rational this morning. You assumed wrong. Rachel stepped closer. Open the door. No. This is ridiculous. You don't work here. I'm your wife. That does not give you authority over my company. Her face changed when I said it. Not because the statement was surprising, but because I said it in front of someone else. Victor lowered his voice. Dylan, this little performance is going to damage whatever value is left. You contacted my vendor and a former employee before I agreed to any sale. His expression barely moved. Basic due diligence. You asked Owen to say I mismanage everything. I asked for an honest assessment. He gave you one. Rachel looked at her father. That was the first moment I saw uncertainty between them. I held out 2 envelopes. Peter sent these. Victor didn't take his. Rachel did. She opened it, skimmed the first page, and laughed once without humor. A cease and desist letter? Against your own wife? Against anyone pretending to speak for the company? You're punishing me. I'm protecting what you tried to sell. Victor took his envelope at last. This is theater, he said. No, last night was theater. I nodded toward the parking lot exit. You need to leave. Victor stared at me for several seconds. Then he turned and walked to his car. Rachel stayed. You made me look awful in front of everyone, she said. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. You handed my company to your father as a party favor. I was trying to help you face reality. You don't get to create a crisis and then call yourself the rescue. Her eyes narrowed. You have no idea how people talk about you in my circle. There it was. Not concern, not fear for our finances. Embarrassment. What do they say? I asked. She glanced toward the office door. That you're not on my level. The words came out quietly. I nodded once. And you agree? I think you could be, if you stopped fighting everyone who tries to improve you. I looked at the woman I had married and felt something inside me go still. Leave, Rachel. She walked away without another word. That afternoon, Peter called after reviewing the documents. The offer is aggressive, he said. That's a polite word for it. The bigger issue is the pattern. Vendor contact. Former employee contact. Statements about instability. Your wife's speech. The prepared agreement. Can we stop them? We can make continued interference expensive and stupid. We can also preserve claims if they damage a contract. I looked at the pending agreement on my screen. What about the new deal? Be transparent with the partner about authority, not your marriage. Authority. That advice mattered. The company we were negotiating with had already heard a rumor that ownership might change. Their representative called me that afternoon and asked directly whether they were dealing with the right person. Yes, I said. You are. We received a message suggesting your wife and father-in-law might become involved. They have no ownership, no management role, and no authority to negotiate for us. My attorney can provide written confirmation. There was a pause. We needed to know who actually had authority. That would be me. I sent the documents within the hour. The agreement didn't magically sign itself because I sounded confident. They asked questions. Peter answered them. We revised one clause and scheduled a final meeting. That was how real business worked. Not with speeches and folders at banquet tables, but with verification, revisions, signatures, and people willing to put their names behind what they said. Rachel continued calling. I answered once that evening. You embarrassed me at my office, she said. You came to my office to announce a transition that did not exist. My father was trying to protect the employees. Your father contacted a former employee and asked him to lie. He asked for perspective. He used the phrase, pattern of mismanagement. You're twisting everything. I have the message. Silence. Then she said, you couldn't stand that I got promoted. The night was about you until you made it about taking my company. You are so insecure. Maybe, but insecurity didn't print that contract. She hung up. I stayed away from the house for 3 days while Peter and I secured records, and I met with a divorce attorney for an initial consultation. I didn't file immediately. I needed to understand the financial exposure, what was personal, what was corporate, and what separation would mean. The divorce attorney asked whether Rachel had access to company funds. Not legally. That wasn't my question. I thought about it. She knew where some documents were kept. She had limited calendar access. No banking authority. Verify all of it. I already did. Good. At home, we had one joint household account for routine expenses and separate accounts for everything else. I moved my direct personal deposits, documented the balance, and left enough in the joint account to cover normal bills. I didn't drain anything. I didn't freeze her out. I simply stopped assuming marriage made every boundary unnecessary. On the 4th day, Rachel left a voicemail that changed the entire situation. I had ignored 2 earlier calls. The 3rd went to voicemail. Her tone was sharp but controlled, like she was explaining something to an unreasonable employee. You're forcing us to pressure you because you won't be honest with yourself. Once the vendors and clients think you're unstable, you'll take the offer. You always calm down when you realize you're alone. Dad knows how these things work. Stop making this harder. I replayed it twice. Then I sent it to Peter. He called within 5 minutes. She said, once the vendors and clients think you're unstable? Yes. And you'll take the offer? Yes. Save the original file. Do not edit it. Do not respond. I sat in the hotel room with the phone in my hand. There was no longer any room for me to tell myself Rachel had merely gone along with Victor's plan at the dinner. She knew the pressure campaign existed. She believed isolation would make me surrender. Worse, she spoke as if using our marriage against me was reasonable. Cole came by that evening with takeout. He listened to the voicemail and put his fork down. That's not a wife trying to save her husband. I know. You keep saying that like you're trying to convince yourself. I'm trying to understand how long she's thought of me this way. Cole closed the takeout container. You may never get an answer that makes sense. She used things I told her in private. Yes. She knew which vendors were difficult. She knew which client delay had caused the cash squeeze. She knew I hadn't told many people about the restructuring. Yes. I thought she was asking because she was worried. Cole looked at me. She was gathering leverage. Hearing it from someone else made it harder to soften. The next morning, Owen agreed to speak with Peter and confirm when Victor had contacted him. The vendor forwarded the original email and a second message in which Victor had said the family was preparing to stabilize operations. A former client sent me another email Victor had written, suggesting that I was under personal pressure and might not be able to maintain commitments. Each message was careful on its own. Together, they formed a sequence. Victor had approached people around the company, implying instability without directly claiming a completed sale. Rachel had supplied enough private information to make him sound credible. The promotion dinner had been designed to turn rumor into public humiliation and public humiliation into a signature. Peter summarized it in one sentence. They were manufacturing inevitability. A week after the dinner, Rachel asked me to attend a family meal to clear the air. Her text read, "Everyone is upset. We need to discuss this like adults. No lawyers. No theatrics." I showed it to Peter. "You can attend," he said. "Do not surrender originals. Bring copies. Assume anything you say may be repeated." Cole was less diplomatic. "They want you in a room where Victor controls the story. That's why I'm going." "You sure?" "Yes." I had spent years avoiding family confrontations because I thought keeping the peace protected the marriage. All it had really done was teach them that I would absorb disrespect privately. This time, I brought a folder. Not Victor's leather one. Just a plain file folder with printed copies arranged in order. The dinner was at Victor and Elaine's house. Rachel's Aunt Claire was there, along with two other relatives who had attended the promotion dinner. Claire was 58, direct without being cruel, and one of the few people in Rachel's family who didn't treat Victor's opinion like policy. When I walked in, the table was already set. Elaine met me near the dining room. "I'm sorry this has become so ugly," she said quietly. "Did you know about the contract?" Her eyes flicked toward Victor. "No." "Did you know he was contacting my vendors?" "No." I believed her. Rachel entered from the kitchen. She looked composed, but her mouth tightened when she saw the folder in my hand. I said, "No lawyers." "My lawyer isn't here." "What's in the folder?" "The reason I'm here." Victor was pouring wine. "We are not turning dinner into a deposition," he said. "Then don't lie, and it won't feel like one." Claire looked between us. "Can we sit down before this gets worse?" We sat. For the first 10 minutes, nobody touched the food. Rachel started. "I asked everyone here because Dylan has been telling people that my father and I tried to steal his company. I told the people affected that you had no authority. You sent legal threats to my father. I sent notice to stop interfering with my business." Victor folded his hands on the table. "This is exactly the emotional angle I expected. Dylan was offered a way to exit a distressed company with dignity. He chose hostility." Claire turned toward me. "Is the company distressed?" "It was in a difficult restructuring. It was not failing, and it was not for sale." Rachel exhaled loudly. "That is what he always says. He minimizes everything until it becomes an emergency." I opened the folder. Rachel looked at me. "See? This is what I mean. You came prepared to put on a show." "No," I said. "You already put on the show. I came with the record." Victor gave a small smile. "Very dramatic." I slid the buyout contract onto the table. This was presented to me at Rachel's promotion dinner, in front of her coworkers and family. It had my company's legal name, an offer amount, and transition terms. It was prepared before Rachel called my company sinking into a microphone. Victor shrugged. "Preparation is not wrongdoing." "No, but it proves the offer was not spontaneous." Rachel crossed her arms. "I knew Dad wanted to discuss options. I didn't know he would bring it out then. You whispered, 'Don't make this harder than it has to be.' I was trying to keep you from causing a scene. You had the microphone." Claire looked down, hiding a reaction. I removed the vendor email and placed copies in front of Rachel, Victor, and Elaine. This was sent 6 days before the dinner. Victor told one of my vendors he was exploring continuity options during a possible leadership transition. No transition had been discussed with me. Victor glanced at the page. "I was gathering information. You told him Rachel was part of the transition." "It was a possibility. Not one I had agreed to." Rachel shook her head. "You were under pressure. We needed to know whether the company could be saved." I placed Owen's forwarded message on top of the first email. "This is Victor asking a former employee to confirm that I mismanage everything." Victor's jaw tightened. He was a former employee. His perspective was relevant. Owen told you it was not true. He may have had reasons to protect you. He had already left the company. He had nothing to gain. Claire picked up the page. You asked him to say Dylan mismanaged everything before you made the offer? Victor leaned back. I asked whether he would confirm an assessment. That is not what this says, Claire replied. The room shifted slightly. Not toward me exactly. Away from certainty. Rachel reached for her water. This is being taken out of context. I placed the former client email down. Here is another message. Victor said I was under personal pressure and might not maintain commitments. Elaine read it slowly. Victor, why would you tell a client that? Former client, he corrected. Why would you tell anyone that, she asked. He frowned at her. Because we were assessing exposure. Elaine looked at him for another second, then lowered her eyes to the page. I took out the voicemail transcript. Rachel saw the header and went pale. What is that? A transcript of the voicemail you left me. You recorded me? You left it on my phone. I was upset. I know. I read it aloud. You're forcing us to pressure you because you won't be honest with yourself. Once the vendors and clients think you're unstable, you'll take the offer. You always calm down when you realize you're alone. Rachel put her glass down too quickly. Water splashed over the rim. That is not what I meant. Claire looked up. What did you mean? I meant that he listens when people stop enabling him. By making his vendors think he was unstable? Claire asked. Rachel turned toward me. You are humiliating me. You made our marriage a business ambush in public. I'm just showing the receipts. Victor pushed his chair back slightly. That recording proves nothing except that Rachel was trying to reason with a stubborn husband. Peter had warned me not to argue every point. Evidence worked better when people had space to hear it. So I placed his letter on the table. This is formal notice that neither of you has authority to represent me or the company. It identifies the contacts you made and warns against further interference. Victor barely looked at it. You think a letter scares me? No, I think the facts should. Then I removed the final document. It was a letter from the company we had been negotiating with, confirming that we had completed their authority review and were proceeding to final signature pending the last agreed revision. The company was not collapsing, I said. The restructuring was almost complete. This agreement was already being negotiated before the dinner. Your rumors nearly delayed it. Rachel stared at the letter. You never told me it was this far along. I told you an agreement was pending. You hid the details. They were confidential. I'm your wife. And you used the details you did have to help your father pressure me. I was trying to protect us. No, you were trying to make me feel isolated enough to sell. She opened her mouth, then looked toward Victor. That small glance told the whole story. Claire saw it too. So the company was about to become more stable, she said. And the offer was still that low? Victor's voice hardened. The offer reflected risk. It reflected opportunity. I said. Yours. Victor pointed at me. You should be grateful someone was willing to rescue you. You weren't trying to save me. You were trying to corner me. Rachel's polished expression finally cracked. You have no idea what it has been like being married to someone who refuses to grow up. I looked at her. What does growing up mean to you? Listening to people who know more than you. Your father? People with judgment, credentials, perspective. I built the company you tried to buy, and it almost failed. It had a hard quarter. You were drowning. No, you needed me to be drowning so the contract would look like a lifeline. She shook her head rapidly. You always do this. You twist concern into disrespect because you're ashamed you never finished school. I felt every person at the table watching me. Years earlier, that sentence would have pulled me into an argument about my worth. I would have listed contracts, payroll totals, and client results, anything that might prove I belonged in the room. I didn't do that now. This is not about my degree, I said. It is about your conduct. Rachel laughed bitterly. Of course it is. You contacted people around my company without authority. I didn't contact them. Dad did. You gave him private information. I talked to my father about my marriage. You told him enough to make false claims sound credible. I never told him to lie. You said the goal was to make vendors and clients think I was unstable. I was frustrated. You said I would take the offer when I realized I was alone. I knew you would calm down eventually. That is not calming someone down. That is isolating them. The room went quiet. Elaine had been staring at the transcript. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. Rachel, did you really tell people his company was unstable before he agreed to sell? Rachel looked at her mother. I didn't tell people directly. That was not my question. Victor cut in. Elaine, you do not understand the business context. She turned toward him. Victor, let her answer. I had never heard Elaine use that tone with him. Victor's face tightened. Rachel looked around the table as if searching for an exit that didn't require admitting anything. We were trying to create enough pressure for him to make a rational decision, she said at last. Claire leaned back. So yes. Rachel glared at her. No, not like that. How else is there to say it? Claire asked. Victor stood. This conversation is over. I stayed seated. You wanted this discussed like adults. I will not sit here while you defame my family. Everything I said is supported by your own messages. You will regret trying to embarrass this family. I looked up at him. Good. Then Discovery can do what this dinner just did. He froze. Peter had explained Discovery to me in plain terms. If Victor sued over the statements, then emails, devices, messages, contact records, drafts, and communications about the proposed acquisition could become relevant. Victor knew that too. His threat died in the room. Claire looked at him carefully. You're not going to sue, are you? Victor picked up the attorney letter. This is beneath me. No, Elaine said. It is in front of you. Rachel pushed her chair back. I cannot believe you brought all of this here. You brought a contract to your promotion dinner. That was Dad. You used the microphone. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, but the tears didn't soften what came next. You ruined the most important night of my career. I stood. You did that yourself. I gathered the originals and left the copies on the table. No one tried to stop me. 2 days later, the new company agreement was signed. It didn't make me rich overnight. It did something more useful. It gave my team a stable pipeline, protected jobs, and turned the restructuring from a period of fear into a difficult decision we had survived. We still had work to do. We still had invoices to collect and schedules to manage. But the company was ours, and everyone involved knew who had authority. Victor's interference didn't lead to an instant courtroom defeat or dramatic arrest. Real consequences were quieter. Peter sent follow-up notices. 2 vendors requested written clarification before speaking with Victor again. A business contact Victor had been pursuing heard about the unauthorized outreach and delayed a separate deal while reviewing his conduct. Owen provided a signed statement. The former client confirmed the email was unsolicited. Victor stopped contacting people connected to my company. He also stopped texting me. Elaine called once. I should have spoken sooner, she said. I wasn't your responsibility. No, but I let Victor make cruelty sound reasonable for years. I didn't know what to say to that. She continued. Rachel is staying with us. Okay. She thinks you are trying to destroy her relationship with her father. I did not ask her to choose between us. I know. Her voice broke slightly. I think that is what scares her. Rachel called me the following evening. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she started crying. Not loudly. Rachel never cried loudly. Even upset, she tried to keep control of her breathing. I only wanted you to grow up and let me help, she said. I sat at the kitchen table in the house we still legally shared. Her coffee mug was in the cabinet. Her coat was still hanging by the door. Help doesn't start with making your husband look unstable so your father can buy him out cheap. You keep saying it like that. Because that is what happened. We were scared. You were embarrassed. I was scared people would see the company fail and think I had ignored it. People. My colleagues. My family. Everyone. So you chose what they might think over what was true. You never listen when I tell you how things look. This marriage cannot be built around how I look to your co-workers. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I understood it for years. I supported you through it. I supported you too. You did. Until supporting me stopped improving your image. She went quiet. I could hear a door close in the background. Then Victor's muffled voice. Rachel lowered her tone. What do you want from me? It was the first useful question she had asked. I want you to correct the lies. What does that mean? Contact the vendor and the former client. Tell them there is no ownership transition, that you had no authority, and that the statements about instability were not authorized. That would make me look guilty. You are guilty. She inhaled sharply. I want a written acknowledgement that you have no authority over the company. I want a complete account of what information you gave Victor and who else he contacted. I want you to admit, without calling it help, that you helped create pressure to force a sale. And then what? Then counseling might be worth discussing. Might. Counseling can't fix something you refuse to name. You're giving me demands. I'm giving you conditions for any conversation about repairing the marriage. Dad says signing anything would be admitting legal liability. Your father is still advising you. He is protecting me from accountability. You want me to crawl back? No, I want you to stand up and tell the truth. She was silent for so long that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, she said, I need time. You have it. Are you filing for divorce? I'm proceeding with legal separation. She started crying harder. So that's it. No, that's it, was the promotion dinner. This is what comes after. The following week, Rachel sent me a proposed apology drafted in the language Victor liked. It said mistakes had been made during a stressful period and that certain communications may have created confusion about possible future business arrangements. It didn't say who made the mistakes. It didn't say the communications were intentional. It didn't admit she had used private information. It didn't correct the claim that the company was failing. I sent it back with one sentence. This does not acknowledge what you did. Her response came an hour later. I am not signing a confession you can use against me. That message settled what tears had not. She was still treating accountability as surrender. She still believed the central problem was that I had evidence. I instructed my attorney to proceed. The separation process was not clean or satisfying in the way people imagine decisive endings. There were financial disclosures, appointments, uncomfortable inventories of shared property, and conversations about who would stay in the house during the process. Rachel alternated between anger and grief. Some days she accused me of destroying 9 years over one terrible night. Other days, she said her father had pushed too hard but insisted she had only been trying to protect our future. I never argued about the number of years. Length didn't turn coercion into concern. At one meeting, she looked across the conference table and said, "You really think I never respected you?" I considered lying to make the moment easier. Instead, I said, "I think you respected me when my success felt like a good reflection on you." Her face crumpled. That's cruel. It's honest. You love that I was ambitious. I still don't hate your ambition. Then why are you doing this? Because ambition is not permission to use your spouse as an acquisition target. She looked down at her hands. For a moment, I thought she might finally say it plainly. Then she whispered, "Dad said the company would be safer with us." Us. Not her and me. Her and Victor. That was the last piece I needed. In the months that followed, Rachel corrected one vendor only after Peter sent a formal request through counsel. She never gave the full admission I had asked for. Victor continued telling relatives that I had become vindictive because I couldn't tolerate his daughter's success. Not everyone believed me immediately. One cousin avoided me at a family event. Another sent a careful message saying there were two sides. Claire called that phrase cowardly and told me so. Elaine moved out of Victor's bedroom and into the guest room for several weeks, though I never asked what happened after that. I stopped tracking the family fallout. My responsibility was the company, my employees, and the legal end of my marriage. The watch I bought for Rachel stayed in my glove compartment until the return period had almost expired. One afternoon, I found the receipt, drove back to the store, and returned it. The clerk asked if something was wrong with it. No, I said. It just wasn't right anymore. That night, I went home and loaded the dishwasher. I put the bowls on the bottom rack. Nobody corrected me. There was no grand feeling of victory. The house was quieter than I expected, and sometimes the quiet hurt. I missed the version of Rachel who used to sit on the floor beside me while I sorted early invoices. I missed the woman who once celebrated my first profitable month with grocery store cupcakes because we couldn't afford a proper dinner out. But missing who she had been didn't require me to live with who she had become. The final separation agreement protected the company. Rachel signed a provision confirming she had no ownership, management authority, or right to represent it. She did so through her attorney, without apology. That was enough legally. Emotionally, it told me everything. A few weeks after the papers were signed, I received a message from her. I hope someday you understand that I was trying to save you. I read it once and deleted it. She wanted me to sell the company to prove I knew my place. Instead, I finally stopped giving her one in my life. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.